The autumn of 1923 painted the San Juan Mountains in hues of gold and rust, but for Caleb and Elias Thorne, the world felt stubbornly gray. Caleb, the elder at 28, carried the weight of the Great War on his shoulders and the grease of a dozen failed engines under his fingernails. His younger brother, Elias, was fueled by books and the romantic ghosts of a past he'd never known. It was Elias who had found the deed in the dusty Custer County records, a patented claim for a mine called the Argent Spire, lost to a spring avalanche after its owner went bust in the Great Silver Crash of '93. Under the General Mining Act of 1872, a patented claim meant they weren't just buying mineral rights, they were buying the land itself, seized by the county for 3 decades of unpaid taxes. For the price of their pooled savings, Caleb's army pay and Elias's wages from the lumber mill, they bought 20 acres of rock and forgotten history. "It's a salvage operation, Eli," Caleb had warned, his voice flat. "We'll be lucky to pull out a few £100 of rusted rail and scrap." Elias had just smiled. "History doesn't always stay buried, Cal." Their first month was a battle against the mountain. The mine's entrance was a choked maw of rock and ancient splintered timbers, the scar of the avalanche that had sealed it 30 years prior. They worked with pick, shovel, and a stubborn refusal to quit. Caleb's mechanical ingenuity allowed them to rig a simple winch, powered by the engine of their beat-up Ford truck, to haul away the larger boulders. Elias, wiry and tireless, did the back-breaking work of clearing the smaller debris. The air grew colder, and the first snows dusted the peaks above them. They were running out of time and money. Then, one afternoon, Caleb's shovel struck not rock, but air. A dark, cold breath, smelling of damp earth and stillness, exhaled from the mountain. They had broken through. The beam of Caleb's lantern cut through the darkness, revealing a tunnel, its timber supports groaning but holding fast. A narrow-gauge track, its rails a deep, uniform rust, disappeared into the blackness. It was a time capsule. A miner's pickaxe lay against a wall as if its owner had just set it down for lunch. An ore cart sat on the tracks, half filled with glittering silver-veined rock. The air was thin and cold, reserving everything in a state of suspended decay. They stood there for a long moment, the silence of the mine broken only by their breathing. For the first time in weeks, a flicker of real hope ignited in Caleb's chest. This wasn't just scrap. This was a place where men had toiled, dreamed, and in 1893 had their worlds collapse overnight. They were standing inside that very moment of collapse. You know, that feeling of being on the edge of a breakthrough, when all the hard work might finally pay off, that's a feeling that connects us all. It's what drives us. It's what's driving this channel, too. We are so incredibly close to our goal of 5,000 subscribers, and reaching it would mean the world to us. It would allow us to bring you more stories just like this one. If you're feeling that same spark of discovery that Caleb and Elias are feeling right now, please help us reach our goal. Hit that subscribe button and the like button. It truly makes a difference. And while you're at it, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. It's amazing to see how far these stories travel. Now, let's go deeper into the mountain. With renewed determination, they ventured in. Caleb checked the timbers, tapping them with his hammer, his soldier's caution overriding Elias's wide-eyed wonder. The tunnel was stable. They followed the tracks for what felt like a mile, the passage sloping gently downwards into the heart of the mountain. The main tunnel opened into a large, cavernous chamber, a sort of underground staging area where multiple tunnels converged. It was here that the lantern light caught something enormous, something that didn't belong. It was a machine. Covered in a thick blanket of dust and fine rock debris from a partial ceiling collapse, but its form was unmistakable. An iron behemoth, silent and patient. It was a steam locomotive. Elias let out a breath he didn't realize he'd held in. "Cal, look." Caleb raised the lantern higher, its golden light washing over the shape. He walked closer, his boots crunching on the gravelly floor. He wiped a sleeve across a rusted plate on the side, revealing raised letters, Lima Locomotive Works. It was a geared locomotive, a specialized engine built for the brutal terrain of mountain mining. Caleb recognized the design from an old engineering manual. "It's a Shay," he whispered, a note of reverence in his voice. A Class B, maybe 30, 40 tons? Its boiler was offset to the left, making way for a strange three-cylinder vertical engine on the right. A complex series of drive shafts and gears ran to the wheels, a design that gave it immense power on steep grades and terrible track. It was the perfect machine for a mine like this, and it was theirs, legally, completely theirs. They circled it in silence, their lantern beam dancing across the intricate, dust-caked machinery. It was a ghost of the Silver Age, trapped in stone, waiting. And as the light played across its form, they both felt it, a sense that the locomotive wasn't the only secret this mine was keeping.
For the next 2 days, the Shay locomotive became Caleb's entire world. While Elias explored the adjacent tunnels, mapping out the mine's layout with sketches in a notebook, Caleb conducted a meticulous mechanical autopsy. As a former Army mechanic, he approached the machine with a disciplined curiosity. His first goal was practical: assess its condition. Could it be moved, salvaged, or was it just 40 tons of rust? But a deeper question nagged at him. Why leave it here? The Panic of 1893 was devastating, but a locomotive was a fortune, even as scrap. Unless it was more valuable right where it was. Unless it was hiding something. He started his search logically, eliminating possibilities one by one, talking aloud to Elias as he worked. "The firebox is out," he called, his voice echoing in the chamber. He'd pried open the heavy firebox door to reveal a bed of old, cold ash and crumbling firebrick. Anything in there would have been incinerated. He moved along the massive boiler, tapping its thick, riveted steel shell. "This whole thing is a pressure vessel, Eli. Held water and steam at 200 pounds per square inch. There's no space inside that isn't full of fire tubes, and even if there was, you'd never get to it without cutting the boiler to pieces." Elias emerged from a side tunnel, his face smudged with dirt. "What about the tender, the water tank?" Caleb shook his head, gesturing with a wrench toward the car coupled behind the engine. "Possible, but not smart. 30 years of water, rust, freezing and thawing. Whatever was in there would be ruined. In a wooden box, in a water tank, it would have rotted to mush." The logic was sound. Silas Croft, the mine's original owner, was a brilliant engineer by all accounts. He wouldn't have chosen a hiding place that would let water or heat destroy his treasure. Caleb climbed onto the running board of the locomotive and moved to the front. He unlatched the heavy smokebox door. A cascade of soot and rust fell out as he swung it open. Inside was a maze of pipes, the superheater header and the blast pipe, all coated in a thick, greasy layer of creosote. It was the exhaust of the engine, a conduit for hot, corrosive gas. Another dead end. He checked the toolboxes built into the frame, finding only a few rusted, specialized wrenches. He looked under the cab, in the cramped space between frame and the ash pan, a filthy area designed to catch hot cinders. Nothing. He was running out of places to look. Frustrated, Caleb stood on the frame, wiping his greasy hands on a rag. Elias, meanwhile, had taken to cleaning the locomotive, driven by a historian's desire to see the machine as it once was. He'd climbed onto the boiler jacket, using a stiff brush to sweep away the thickest layers of dust. He worked his way along the top, past the tall steam dome with its heavy bolts and pipes, past the whistle and safety valves. Then he reached a smaller, simpler dome located just behind the main stack. Unlike the steam dome, which was clearly part of the high-pressure system, this one had a simple, flat hatch on top, held down by rusted clamps. "Cal, what's this one for?" Caleb looked up. "That's the sand dome." He explained its function. On the steep, often wet and slippery tracks of a mountain railway, the wheels would lose traction. The engineer could pull a lever that would release sand from that dome, feeding it through small pipes directly onto the rail in front of the driving wheels to provide grip. Elias brushed away the grime. The hatch was made of brass, and beneath the tarnish it gleamed. "It's not a pressure vessel, then?" Elias asked. A light went on in Caleb's eyes. "No," he said slowly, climbing up to join his brother. "It's just a box, a metal box to hold sand." He looked closer. The sand dome sat directly on the boiler shell, and the heat from the boiler would keep the sand perfectly dry so it wouldn't clump or clog the pipes. A dry, secure, easily accessible container. A perfect hiding place. A frantic energy seized them. They took a crowbar and a heavy hammer to the rusted clamps. For 10 minutes the cavern rang with the sharp clang of steel on steel. With a final groaning screech of tortured metal, the last clamp gave way. Caleb gripped the handle of the brass hatch and pulled. It was heavy, but it lifted. They peered inside. The dome was about half full of fine, pale sand. It looked undisturbed. Disappointment washed over Elias. "It's just sand." "Maybe not," Caleb said. He reached in, his arm disappearing up to his elbow. He dug through the surprisingly loose, dry granules. His fingers brushed against something flat and unyielding. It wasn't rock. It was metal. "There's something in here!" Together, they began to scoop the sand out by the handful, their hearts pounding in their chests. Soon, the top of a dark metal box was revealed. It was made of steel. Its seams sealed with a thick layer of lead solder. It was heavy, so heavy it took both of them, straining and grunting, to haul it out of the dome and lower it to the floor of the cab. The box was about 2 feet long and a foot square. On the top, crudely scratched into the metal, were 2 words, Argent Spire, and beneath them, a date, October 1893. This was it. This was what Silas Croft had left behind. Caleb found a cold chisel and his heaviest hammer. He placed the chisel on the lead seam. He took a deep breath, looked at Elias, and swung. The sharp crack echoed through the mine, a sound that broke 30 years of silence. The lead seam was thick, but the steel of Caleb's chisel was harder. With each strike, the seal deformed, split, and finally broke. He worked his way around the lid, the rhythmic clang of his hammer the only sound in the vast, silent chamber. At last, with a final pry from the crowbar, the lid came free with a hiss of displaced air. They shone both their lanterns into the box. The light was thrown back at them, a brilliant, warm, almost liquid glow. The box was lined with oilcloth and packed with gold bullion. Small, heavy bars, stamped with the seal of a Denver mint, nestled tightly together. On top of the gold sat a small drawstring leather pouch. Elias reached in with a trembling hand and opened it. Uncut diamonds, dozens of them, spilled into his palm, their rough facets drinking in the lantern light and fracturing it into 1,000 tiny rainbows. They were speechless. It was the stuff of legends, the lost treasures of the West made real. Caleb, ever the pragmatist, lifted one of the gold bars. It was heavy, dense with promise. "This is it, Eli," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "This is everything. We're done struggling." For a man who had seen the worst of the world, this was a tangible, unambiguous victory. But as they began to lift the gold bars out, they discovered something else underneath. Wrapped in another layer of oilcloth and tied with twine was a package. It was a leather-bound journal and a roll of thick, waxed canvas sheets. The sand in the dome had acted as a desiccant, and the lead-sealed box had created a near-perfect time capsule. The paper and leather were immaculate, preserved from the humidity and temperature swings that would have destroyed them anywhere else. Later that night, back in their small cabin, the gold and diamonds piled on the table between them, Elias opened the journal. The first entry was dated October 12, 1893. It was the diary of Silas Croft. In elegant cursive script, Croft detailed the final desperate days of the Argent Spire mine. He wrote of the repeal of the Sherman Silver Purchase Act, the collapse of the silver market, and the ruin that fell upon men who had been millionaires just weeks before. He wrote of his last-ditch effort, a new tunnel following a hunch that had broken into a lode far richer than anything he had ever found before. The rolled canvas sheets were the assay maps for this new discovery. But it was too late. His credit was gone, his investors were bankrupt. With the mine about to be seized by his creditors, he made a final gamble. He converted his last liquid assets into gold and diamonds, sealed them in the box with his journal and maps, and hid it all in the one place no one would think to look. He planned to wait out the financial storm and return one day to reclaim his legacy. The final entry read, "The weather is turning. A storm is coming that will seal the valley. It will keep my secret safe until I can return. I have not been defeated. I have merely been delayed." He never came back. The avalanche of '94 had buried the mine entrance for good. A profound silence filled the cabin. The pile of gold on the table seemed to lose some of its luster. Caleb saw it as their ticket out. Sell the gold, split it, and never look back. He could buy a garage, a small house, live a quiet life free from worry. But Elias saw something different. He saw an unfinished story. "We can't just take the gold, Cal," he said softly, tracing the lines on Croft's map. This is the real treasure, the chance to finish what he started." The argument lasted for days. It was a conflict between the pragmatist and the dreamer, between the past and the future. Caleb saw the risk, the ghost of Silas Croft's own failure. Elias saw the opportunity, the legacy. In the end, it was a line from Croft's journal that tipped the scales. "Wealth is fleeting," he had written, "but what a man builds from the earth, that endures." They made a decision. They would use a small part of the gold, a fortune in itself, to secure the capital they needed, but they would not run. They would build. The next year was a whirlwind of activity. They filed the necessary paperwork, using Croft's detailed surveys. They hired a small, expert crew, paying fair wages, and they brought in specialists not to scrap the old Shay, but to save it. In a remarkable feat of engineering, the locomotive was carefully disassembled piece by piece inside the mine and hauled out to the surface, a process that mirrored, in reverse, how it must have been brought in decades earlier. The story concludes 5 years later. The Crofts Legacy Mine is a success, one of the most productive silver operations in Colorado, known for its modern techniques and fair treatment of its workers. The Thorne brothers are no longer poor, but they are not idle either. They have become pillars of their community. In the final, Elias and Caleb, now older and more confident, stand in the town square of the revitalized nearby mining town. In the center of the square, on a short section of track, sits the Shay locomotive. It has been beautifully restored, its black boiler gleaming, its brass polished to a mirror shine. A plaque on its side reads, "The Argent Spire, Lima Class B Shay No. 4, built 1890, lost 1893, found 1923. A testament to the spirit that built these mountains." Elias touches the cold steel of the engine. "He was right, you know," he says to Caleb. "This is what endures." Caleb nods, a rare, genuine smile on his face. They hadn't just found a treasure. They had unearthed a purpose. They had become part of the history they had only once dreamed of.